I'd like to welcome Lorie Slutsky, the president of the New York Community Trust and our keynote speaker today. Of course, New York Community Trust is one of the nation's oldest and largest community foundations, making grants to thousands of New York nonprofits. And as president of the trust, Lorie Slutsky is the ideal person to share her thoughts about the state of the Philanthropic Union today. We've invited Jack Crosskop, distinguished lecturer here at Baruch College School of Public Affairs, to moderate the questions for Lorie after her remarks. So again, write your questions on the cards. We'll be collecting them. Jack will put them together. I'd like to take just a second to share some details about Lorie's distinguished career. Lorie began her work at the Trust in 1977 as a grant maker, focusing on funding for education, housing, government and urban affairs, and neighborhood revitalization. She became the Trust's executive vice president in 1987 and then stepped into her role as president in 1990. She's also a member of the board of Independent Sector and co-chairs its panel on the nonprofit sector. Lorie has previously served as board chair on the council, foundations, as well as board source. And in addition to her work in the not-for-profit sector, Lorie is a director of two for-profit companies, Alliance Bernstein Capital Management and AXA. We are so pleased to have you today. I can't tell you how thrilled I was when you accepted. So here is Lorie Slutsky.
Good morning. I actually should take a page out of the Dean's book. I think you gave my remarks, but it only took you 2 minutes. I've been given 20, so let me get started. And let me apologize in advance. Part of what I'm going to talk about today, or at least the examples I'm going to use in one part of this speech, I have lifted from another speech I gave a couple of months ago. And so I won't tell you which one it is, but if you were there, you'll know. I hesitated about accepting this invitation, not because I don't think what you all do is important, but because I think it is just very hard at this moment in time to have real answers to what I think are burning questions. So I want to sort of preface my remarks with what we're doing, what we're thinking, at least at the New York Community Trust, is a work in progress. And I suspect it is not dissimilar to many of your situations. But let me get started. I have been asked to speak about the state of the Philanthropic Union. Here's a big flash for all of you in the room. It's not great, and it will probably be worse next year. Dramatic declines in the stock market and a shaken economy mean less money for everything, including nonprofits. And because many foundations' grants budgets are based on a percentage of average assets over several years, 2009 is not good, but 2010 is likely to be worse, as it will include 2 years of bad investment performance. Much of the recent growth in philanthropy has been fueled by Wall Street and technology titans, and most of them have suffered along with the economic downturn. And I don't have to tell any person in this room that the demands on what you do are growing astronomically. On the other hand, we've just elected a community organizer as president. So I'm hopeful. More and more Americans are beginning to see the value, indeed the necessity, of what we do. And in New York, we know that those who have the means will dig deeper. But the reality is that there are fewer who have the means. We know what we have to do. This is not a new prescription. Trim our budgets where we can, look at each of our services and decide what we can do without, get more efficient, keep asking our donors to support us. This is not news to any person sitting in this room. And as the Dean said, we have to show results. Not just the heartwarming storytelling that we've learned to do. It's the metrics, or at least that's what some of the new philanthropists will tell you. Although it's recently become one of the only subjects among philanthropy bloggers, the clash of new versus old philanthropy isn't really new anymore. One of its earliest practitioners, the Robin Hood Foundation, was started 20 years ago. And since then, the old versus new debate has evolved into something like this. Old philanthropy is found seriously wanting. Old philanthropists are hidebound. I say this with some sensitivity. Keep throwing money at the same problems, are unable to measure either their own work or the work of their nonprofits, and they put all kinds of strings on their grants, often leaving you all the grantees without the core support you need to carry out your projects. New philanthropists, on the other hand, are far more ambitious, tackling huge and often global issues. They're far more strategic and hands-on, bringing the skills they acquired making millions in the for-profit sector to the nonprofit world. They insist on benchmarks, and they hold their grantees accountable. And more recently, they've begun to talk about social capital markets, which would somehow turn donors into investors and grants into investments that produce healthy SROI, social return on investment. The debate, while it may appear to be academic, is not. It can affect what and who gets funded and for how much. The social capital markets folks and groups such as givingwell.org talk about supporting only groups that have proven their efficiency and can provide concrete results. Other new philanthropists take the venture capital approach. They roll up their sleeves, they insist on seats on your board, they decide which management consultants you should hire, and generally move in so they can take your organization from good to great. The title tellingly of a book originally written for business that its author Jim Collins rewrote for the nonprofit sector. It's a short, easy read, but I'll give you the conclusion. Mr. Collins concludes that business models don't really work for nonprofits. What, you might ask, happens to the many small nonprofits that provide essential services in poor neighborhoods, many on shoestring budgets that don't include a bookkeeper, much less money for longitudinal evaluations? What about advocacy organizations that have spent years trying to persuade politicians to do something about climate change? What about the music, dance, and visual arts groups so vital to our city's culture and prosperity, which always scramble for support? And what about those who deal with domestic violence, immigrants, hunger, drug abuse, juvenile crime, and other problems that most people don't even want to talk about? And you might ask, what about other issues that take years and years of work with no guarantee of success? Since Claire has already dated me, I will tell you, almost 30 years ago, when I was a program officer at the New York Community Trust, I made a grant to study the state's Byzantine formula for financing public education. The formula clearly discriminated against the city. We knew that. It gave far less back to us than we paid in taxes. It completely ignored the fact that we had the highest proportion of English language learners, poor students, kids with one parent, kids with disabilities, and those who lived in shelters. Over the years, we supported a number of projects related to school financing, all of which diagnosed the problem correctly, none of which found a solution. The first litigation we supported in the mid-'80s argued that the formula was unjust and unconstitutional. It was unconstitutional to discriminate based on property values, which is the way the New York State formula works. The court found that it was indeed unfair, but it wasn't unconstitutional. When a group years later called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity came together in 1993, it decided to sue the state on the basis that the formula violated the state's constitution because New York State's constitution guarantees a sound basic education to all New York's kids. We made our first grant to that project shortly after it started. We supported the litigation. We also funded activities that brought upstate and downstate interests together. And after several failed attempts in court, the state's highest court mandated an additional $5 billion for the city's schools. We spent 20 years, more than 20 years, and probably $2.5 million. $5 billion a year is a lot of money. Although the money has yet to be fully allocated, we are still involved, supporting the campaign's continuing push to realize the fruits of its victory, which is, in essence, a better education for our kids. By all accounts, my grant work our grant work since I stopped doing it, would surely have been judged failures, both at the 1, 3, 5, 10, and 15-year benchmarks that Wall Street uses to measure its success. But we believed then, as we do now, that it was necessary and the right thing to do, even had the campaign not scored such a stunning victory. The moral of the story: correcting injustice is hard work with unpredictable paths to success. I'm going to skip another story. I've got an example here of a very small fledgling program that started out trying to deal with minority and young women who avoid science. And it was a proposal from an extraordinary guy who had no experience running an organization. And he sent in a proposal. He had been doing this for 2 years, and he sent in a proposal basically asking the trust for money. And it was written with fonts and exclamation points and all sorts of things that would lead you to think, uh-oh. But it was an important problem, and it was one that we had identified as a priority. And when our program officer went out to investigate, he found an inexperienced but an extraordinary jewel of a program. And he made a grant, and we have helped that program grow from what it had when they applied years ago, which was 17 students working in 2 institutions, to 200 students working in 27 institutions. And it has now helped 200 kids go on to college with careers in science. So I guess the point of it is, would a venture philanthropist have stuck with school finance reform? I actually think not. I think they would have cut their losses long ago. Or would they have funded a fledgling organization where the person had no experience, no budget, no backup support? He didn't even have a board. I actually doubt it. And I guess my thought here is scalability and success don't happen instantly. They take time, and they take confidence, and they take risk. And the complication of this notion of venture philanthropy is it's supposed to take the real tried and true part of entrepreneurship, which is the risk, and it tries to take out all the risk. So it's sort of a complicated debate. The reality is that old philanthropy, at least in my humble opinion, has always been ambitious. We have always been concerned with a grantee's ability to operate efficiently, and we've made grants to help improve operations. We have always expected results, and we have always tried to get to the heart of the problem and not just treat the symptoms. And we have always funded emerging issues and new ways to respond to old ones. And we have always expected, yes, expected our fair share of failures. So new philanthropy may not be so new, and many of the venture philanthropy foundations that have been around for a while are starting to sound a lot more like traditional funders. Some have discovered, lo and behold, that tackling huge and complex projects, even with lots and lots of money, takes time and involves, yes, failure. They're beginning to understand that results are hard to measure, not because we don't want to measure it, but because many of the issues we support have multiple causes, and the impact of a particular grant or even a set of grants simply can't be isolated. Michael Edwards, who works at the Ford Foundation, wrote a book called Just Another Emperor: The Myths and Realities of Philanthrocapitalism. I didn't make that up. He believes that despite its great potential, new philanthropy, and I'm quoting from his book here, is flawed in both its proposed means and its promised ends. It sees business methods as the answer to social problems, but offers little rigorous evidence or analysis to support this claim, and ignores strong evidence pointing in the opposite direction. And he goes on to cite the problem. He cites projects that when they run into problems because they've got this venture approach, when they try to scale up, they either suffer mission drift or they cut their losses and move. They reduce their advocacy efforts. They weed out the hardest to serve clients so they can show better numbers. And they focus on revenue generating activities to sort of move away from the real purpose of their projects. So, where do I come out on new philanthropy? Surely the new philanthropists have pushed us older philanthropists to be bolder. and to pursue more vigorously the often elusive goal of quantifying results. They've brought good ideas and much-needed attention to long-neglected problems, and they've definitely brought a new vocabulary to the field. But many of them are setting up their foundations to close down after a period of time. They cite, from their viewpoint, the need to tackle today's pressing problems now. They question the wisdom of old philanthropy, which historically sets up foundations to last forever. They say that tomorrow's donors will take care of tomorrow's problems. Tomorrow's donors will take care of tomorrow's problems. But I guess I would posit the question to all of you this morning: where would we be this year, and where would we be next year if we depended largely or exclusively on living donors and non-endowed foundations to respond to the problems we see? As the president of a community foundation whose discretionary grant-making program is supported almost entirely by funds set up by people in their wills, where they expressly left money to us to help solve the unanticipated problems of future generations, I can tell you emphatically that at my organization, we think both the spend today and the save for tomorrow is critical to effective philanthropy. We value the New Yorkers who give today, as well as those who have ensured that our successors will have money that is not contingent on irrational exuberance in markets and not restricted to today's problems. We value foundations that have set themselves a goal and a time frame in which to accomplish it, and we value as well foundations such as Ford and Rockefeller, old philanthropists who have been ambitious, bold, and successful and are in it for the long haul. Pluralism is the core of American democracy. It demands that we respect difference and accommodate it. I believe, personally, that the current debate between old and new will fade, and we will all adopt and adapt to what works, both from the new models and the old models. But for the moment, for all of you in this room, I think that nonprofits have to pay careful attention to which kinds of philanthropists they're asking for money and appeal to them in the language they understand with the information they want. And make no mistake about this, as the Dean said in his introductory remarks, even old-timers, old hidebound philanthropists are looking for better measures of impact. It simply is not enough to tell us that 50 kids attended the after-school program or that you referred 50 families for housing counseling. We all need to know what happened to those children, and we need to know what happened to those families. Another debate, more immediate, at least from my vantage point, in philanthropy is the following. Do we change our grant making to respond to today's pain, or do we stay focused on our long-term goals? It is a debate going on in my boardroom, and I bet every boardroom across the country. Some of the large national foundations have decided to stick with their existing programs and chosen not to make emergency grants. For a community foundation like mine, that's an exercise that really has no meaning, because our mandate is to improve the quality of life in New York City. You can't ignore the pain. The New York Community Trust Board recently approved $10 million in grants, $7 million for safety net grants to support nonprofits that provide food and shelter, and to legal service groups to help people with predatory debt collectors and a range of civil legal issues. To put it in perspective, last year at our February meeting, we approved $3 million worth of grants. This year we approved 10. That means we tried to respond quickly, aggressively, and with as much as we could muster to meet the problem. It also means, just to put it in perspective, that we will have less money for the rest of the year from a budget that is slightly lower than last year's budget. Some philanthropy commentators have said that the economic crisis presents us with real opportunity. We are, after all, coming out of a decade of unprecedented abundance, some of which proved to be better, it was too good to be true. But I guess I grew up, my father was a garment center manufacturer, and there is no garment center left in New York, so extinction is something I'm used to, but I use this analogy. So we come out of a decade of extraordinary abundance, where while we never had enough, we had more to deal with the kinds of problems we care about dealing with than we've ever had before. So I use the analogy of a department store. And it used to stock the in-fad dresses, the old fogey dresses, the teen dresses, the older dresses, the matronly dresses, in every size and every color. So too, in the last decade, foundations have made grants to many groups for advocacy on the same issues, to add services to basic programs, and open satellites in every neighborhood. And we tried to make grants to every racial and ethnic group so they too could provide services in their own communities. These were all good and important things to do. But the department stores are now stocking only selected items, reducing their inventories and relying on other locations to supply what they don't have. And though the comparison may seem trivial, I don't mean it to be, for the department stores, it's a matter of survival rather than opportunity. I would submit to you all this morning, it may be no different for us. In tight times, we all need to make better use of our resources, and we need to be smarter about how we do our work. I told you about the $10 million worth of grants that our board approved a few weeks ago. When the staff at the trust made the recommendations to our board about these grants, we simultaneously discussed what we would not be doing this year. We would not be funding new organizations. We would not be funding advocacy that pits one essential sector against another. We would not be funding important but non-essential services, nor would we support what we used to call Cadillac programs, a great program that can add one more component that makes it even better. All of these things are important. We'd love to be able to do them, but we're not going to be able to do them this year. What we would be doing is trying to balance the needs, as I said, to help New Yorkers hit hardest by the recession with our commitments to long-term goals. We would first focus on making sure that people stay in their homes and have enough to eat. We would fund nonprofits with proven track records so they can meet increasing demand. We would help nonprofits operate more efficiently through shared services and management improvements. And we would also continue to press for better health care for all New Yorkers and ensure adequate funding for our public schools. We need to remember, at least as I look to report to you on the state of the Philanthropic Union, the limitations of foundation and individual donor funding in the overall nonprofit sector in New York. I think that the trust is not alone in a long-held policy of not making grants to replace government money, not because some of those programs aren't critical, but because we don't have enough money to replace government funding. And because so many nonprofits get the bulk of their funding from government, that's where the major threat to the state of the Philanthropic Union lies, in my opinion. New York State, New York City are all suffering budget cuts. Some we've seen, some we've read about. All will begin to feel in earnest as the state rolls over its contracts, as the city rolls over its contracts, as many of you find contracts delayed 3 or 4 months without reimbursement back to the date you were providing services. That, to me, is the challenge to the Philanthropic Union, certainly in this city. We hope that our grantees will see the wisdom of advocating collectively. We know from our experience that cooperative efforts can be fruitful, but they are challenging and, in our opinion, cannot be forced. So we will support joint projects that come to us from you all, but we won't force you to work together. We are also helping nonprofits get in early on discussions about how the federal stimulus package will be spent in the city, as we think that will have an enormous impact on the way in which we as a sector can continue to provide service to our constituents. You and I both know that this crisis is a way of life for far too many New Yorkers who have always lived in poverty and now face absolute destitution. The good news, and maybe it's the only good news of the morning, is that over the years, strong nonprofits have built networks of services and advocacy, and they have served this city extremely well. That infrastructure has helped us weather fiscal crises in the past, including the period after September 11th. This one is certainly different, certainly far more uncertain, and seems of a magnitude at least I can't remember. But given what the American people did in the last presidential election, added to the legions of stalwart nonprofit professionals, many in this room this morning, we have good reason to believe that change will come and that things will get better and that we will find creative ways to deal with the challenges ahead. Thank you. All right, do I sit or is that coming up?
Thank you. If you have questions, we would like you to write them on the cards. Our class cop will manage the process of asking the questions.
Thank you for that wise perspective, Lorie. There's something to be said for experience. While the cards are coming in, let me ask one question, if I can take a prerogative here, Clara, if that's all right, which is, going back to your first point about new philanthropy, does new philanthropy, in your view, mean new money coming into philanthropy, or do you worry that it's diverting money that might go to more traditional philanthropy?
It's an interesting question. I never worry about money coming into philanthropy, whether it goes to the new or the old. I think the more the better. This is my basic opinion. I worry more in how it gets spent, not that it goes old form versus new form, but that we set up a system where we cut off the new and wonderful experimentation of the sector, and we put people through a process where we measure what we can rather than do what's important. And I worry about that. That I think is a bigger worry than whether money will go to a Skoll kind of foundation or a community foundation. To me, the bigger issue philanthropically is whether we can find some common ground on the spend today and save for tomorrow, because I think that has been the element of extraordinary exception in American philanthropy.
Given Wall Street's problems, what are the most important lessons that private sector could or should learn from the nonprofit sector? Small question.
I think they could certainly learn a lesson from us on bonuses, don't you think? That's an interesting question. I'm not smart enough to be able to tell you how we got to where we got on Wall Street and other places, but I am clear that that nonprofits have learned one thing really well, and that is they take risk, but they temper it, and they take it with sort of a fair degree of caution. And it looks like corporations, Wall Street, the banks, the debt financing was unbridled leverage with no sense of risk. And so maybe that's a lesson they can learn from us.
Can you please comment on the rate of creation of new nonprofits and their impact on efficiency?
A really important question. We're just starting to think about that. I mean, if you look at the statistics, I don't have the most recent, but the number of nonprofits that have been created across this country, even in this city, are unbelievable. And we now have 1.3 million nonprofits across the country. I think it goes to the point I made before, that when we experimented boldly and created new, every size, every flavor. I think the creation of many of those will force us to look at reallocating resources, and we're not going to be able to emerge from this crisis with every organization intact. And so we either have to figure out how to take the small, newer ones and connect them to older, stronger ones and keep the service delivery close by, or we're going to have to figure out ways to share service, pull out some of the back office costs. I don't believe that we can sustain the sector given the limitations on funding over the next 3 to 5 years and have it come out the other end looking just the way it looks today.
Is there an effort, or can you comment on the possibility of an effort to create a pooled fund of emergency short-term needs in New York City? And the analogy here is the September 11th fund, where foundations pooled their resources.
A good question. I don't have an answer. I think, sadly, the impetus for a September 11th fund is not what you're going to see emerging here. It's going to be sort of death by 1,000 cuts rather than by one giant explosion. I think that there has been some talk about, I wouldn't say a September 11th kind of fund to respond to everything, but there, at least in my foundation, we have begun discussions with other funders and across the city and our own donors with things like dealing with cash flow, which is going to be a big issue, trying to take the pieces we know are likely to occur and find a way to focus joint attention on it. Beyond that, I haven't heard much talk about anything else.
How is the New York Community Trust getting nonprofits involved in discussions on how to spend the stimulus package in New York?
Pat, I think we're thinking about a number of grants that will both provide good information and fund advocacy and organizing around those conversations, but I don't think we've made those grants yet, have we? You'll be hearing about those, but we haven't done them yet.
What is your opinion of the role of pro bono service to strengthen the most vital, impactful social service organizations during this recession?
I think pro bono services are always fabulous. Free service is free service. I think, though, you can tell me better, I think, that it's got to be service you need. It's got to come in a form you can use, and it can't detract so much from trying to organize the volunteers who provide it that you can't get your work done. One of the things we are doing is, and have been funding for years, is pro bono legal services through the Legal Services Network, and we've tried very hard to ensure that we fund the training from legal service offices and others so that the pro bono services are equipped to do what they need to do. You don't get a matrimonial lawyer suddenly trying to deal with your debt collector or something.
Here's a bit of a challenge.
Shoot.
Healthy nonprofits depend on a portion of new funders every year. Most funders are not funding new groups, and most current funders have less to give. Question: how do you justify not accepting new applicants?
I think it's a very fair point. I didn't say we wouldn't accept new applicants. We accept all applicants. We have an open process. I think that if Pat Swan, one of my colleagues at the Trust who looks at grant proposals, came in, looked at a great proposal that came in for a new program and said, this would really be something we could do, she would have to justify why starting something new without much confidence in its ability to sustain itself, as nice as it would be to make that $40,000 or $50,000 or $60,000 grant, wouldn't be money that would provide nice service for a year and then disappear. Could she do it? She might. I mean, if we found an organization, here's a great example. Here's what I worry about. We have, in New York, always, we have an abundance of organizations, all of which provide X. And they all provide X in the same zip code or the same 3 zip codes. And you turn around and you look, and the zip code across the bridge needs the same service, probably has higher incidence of the problem, and has nobody to provide the service. In this environment, what our first choice will be is to take an organization in another place and ask them to extend their service, because we believe there will be more efficiency in providing that service from an existing organization that can sort of have some scale. If we can't find a way to do that, and this is an absolutely critical service, we will look to make a new grant. But I am telling you the threshold to get over that will be high. And how do I justify it? If I justify it by thinking that at the end of the day, our responsibility is to ensure service delivery to organizations and populations that need it. It's not to make every nonprofit feel they have equity and access to grant money all the time. Is that harsh and cruel? I hope not, but it is the reality. My board would ask really tough. We ask hard questions now when we start funding a brand new startup. Is there enough interest? Is there sustainable financing? Can we sort of get some traction around the organization and the issue? And when you ask that without the opportunity for a lot of new funders to come behind you, without the opportunity for an organization to go out and do individual donor solicitation, I think you're going to find it hard to come up with a satisfactory answer.
I'll just note that there are several questions involving not awarding funding to new organizations being a problem.
I think that it is a problem, but it is the decision we've made. Sorry.
Sector-related question. In the past, the New York Community Trust has sponsored roundtables of conversations on specific topics. For example, services and needs of people who are blind. Inviting experts and grantees to see each other as well as competitors. This was a terrific opportunity for grantees. Has this been successful in meeting outcomes? Will you do this again? Do you see this as a role for foundations?
Let me take those in order. I think we've done it in blindness and a number of other areas. I think there's a meeting going on in my office this morning as we speak with the organizations that we funded through this safety net work and others who didn't originally get funding to talk about what they're seeing, how we can be more helpful, how we can be more efficient. At the Trust, since our mandate is geographically targeted, we fund across a number of areas. We do those discussions in a lot of them. Some have been very successful, some have been moderately successful, and some, frankly, haven't been successful, but we will continue to do them. Is it a model for foundations? It is, but a lot of the private foundations who are our funding colleagues have so many other interests and issues that I don't know that they would devote the time to it.
Another sector question. You hardly mentioned the arts in your remarks. Is the New York Community Trust funding arts organizations as a priority for arts programs? Are there discernible trends in the foundation priorities?
Good question. The New York Community Trust is funding arts. We think it's critical. We've always funded the arts organizations. We will continue. We actually have not eliminated any funding categories. If you know anything about the Trust, we have about a $40 million grants budget, or used to be about $40 million. And it is not like Rockefeller or Ford, just a single pool of $40 million. It's made up of 427 individual charitable trusts, which have purposes as narrow as helping injured, needy classical ballet dancers to helping mankind. And so we have specific field of interest funds for the arts. We have funds for blindness. We have funds for cancer research. We have a huge fund for environment. We have not eliminated any of those categories. One, because we can't. We have money designated for it. And two, if we had the opportunity, I don't think we would. I think we believe at the far end of this crisis, New York needs to emerge as rich and vibrant as it started.
Here's a question that moves in a different direction than the others on numbers of organizations. To me, there are too many nonprofits. Each idea results in a new 501c3. What role can you, the city administration, and the umbrella groups, I guess that means the federations and coalitions, nonprofits, take to move the strategic partnerships forward?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Is it how do you sort of stop the creation of new 501c3s?
I think it's less that than what can funders do, meaning the city and also the federations, to encourage partnerships of organizations rather than so many more new organizations.
Well, I think they can do what you all find not a good idea, and that's not fund the new organizations. That's one thing they can do.
This is not a scientific poll we're taking.
The other thing they can do is ask the tough questions. An organization comes in and says, we want to do X in neighborhood Y, and you might say, well, did you know there are 4 other organizations already providing service X in neighborhood Y? And that's one way. It is, I think, ultimately not something I can give you a formula for. It is old-fashioned grant work. People sit down and engage people with good ideas about what they want to do and put out on the table the complications, the questions, is it duplicative? I mean, at the New York Community Trust, we have a category of decline called duplicative service. If it's the same service being provided in a neighborhood we judge already well served, we will likely turn down the application. Can we stop that organization from going to 25 other funders and getting funded? No.
Here are a couple about trends in philanthropy. What are New York nonprofits doing to develop relationships with foreign financial firms such as Barclays, UBS, etc.?
I don't know. I really don't know. No comment.
Can you comment on the foundations that are closing or reducing operations because of the economy, and whether there are discussions about merging with others so there are no gaps in services?
Let me take a slightly different turn on that question, which may not be the question the person asked. But I do know, I don't think a lot of foundations will close because of the economy. I think a good number of foundations have been hurt or closed because of the Madoff Ponzi scheme, and sadly a new Ponzi scheme every day that you hear about. The one example, real example I can give you is Pickhour, which had done some great work here and in Palm Beach, and suffered $1 billion loss in the Madoff scandal. I think there are going to be a number of people who ask the question, how did $1 billion foundation have all of its assets in one place? That's a subject for another day, but I can tell you I got a letter from Barbara Pickhour, and I am sure I am not on a short list of funders with a list of their grantees pleading for consideration to critical services, and try and take a look at that, and we will.
Can you comment on the effect of the internet and technology, i.e. websites, etc., on not-for-profits?
I think it's amazing that with a click of a button you can find out a lot about almost any organization. I think it's great for charities. I think it's expensive because you have to keep updating them and retooling them. But I think it's important to have your name out there and what you do. I think the charity websites that rate you, because all of that information is now online. This is a personal pet peeve of mine. I think they provide great information, but it's very hard to put all of us in the same box. Take line 27 from your 990 and divide it by line 82 from your 990 and come up with an efficiency factor or a number of stars you can get. And the business we're in is much more textured and much more complicated. And so I hope that as we get more of these, Charity Navigator and a bunch of others, I hope as we get more of them, the American public understands what the information is. It's a good start. It's a good start to understand something about an organization. But when you say, that organization over there is bad because I took line 10 and divided it by line 15 and they came out with an X percentage. And the institution I work for, we go from 4 stars on Charity Navigator to 2 stars on Charity Navigator, depending on, we get our best ratings when we raise less money, because it's all outflow, it's all output. It's how much money you put out. It has nothing to do with whether your board wants you to keep operating reserves for a rainy day, or whether you have an endowment, or whether you have restrictions. It's as good as it can be given what it aspires to do. I just wish it would be clearer with the American public about the limitations of the information it puts out.
I think I can say that Baruch has a survey report in the works, Dean Birdsall and a colleague, that discusses nonprofits' use of technology and updates some data from 10 years or so ago, and watch this space. More to come. If there is no funding for new nonprofits and you're encouraging existing nonprofits to expand and extend services, is there a way for social entrepreneurs to identify and connect with current providers? How can we learn about existing providers to avoid duplicative services?
Well, there's lots of good information out there now. If behind the question is, how do you sort of make more formal and organize access for those who aren't likely to get new funding, at least this year? I don't have an answer for that, but it's a good question. We should think about how to make that happen.
About foundation practice, do you see a trend in increased transparency from fund makers, I guess grant makers, to CBOs. Namely, why won't you really tell a charity why its application was not funded?
I'm not sure we won't tell a charity why it isn't funded. What we're very reluctant to do is publish that information because our decision to turn down an organization isn't necessarily a evaluative comment that the organization's bad or that it's not effective. It's just, I mean, there are things we won't fund because our board sets certain priorities. Doesn't mean somebody else shouldn't. So we're very cautious about, we've had donors say, why don't you just sort of put out all these declines so we know which are the bad organizations? Well, you know, we turn down really good organizations sometimes that will fund for X but not fund for Y. So, but Pat, do you get organizations calling you and asking you why they're declined, and do you answer it?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
I think a lot depends on the relationship with the program officer. You can always pick up the phone and ask for some clarification, and my colleagues and I generally are very comfortable doing that kind of clarification.
Last question. How do you think we can best ensure that the federal stimulus package dollars goes toward early childhood programs that work? And I guess there is early childhood money in the stimulus package, as I recall.
I think there is, and I don't have the answer. It's a good question, but I don't have the answer.
There are many good questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to ask them all. Thank you.
Great.
Lorie.
Thank you.